welcome everyone, also from our side. We are very happy to be here. It's a great venue and a great conference. We've already been here like 1 year ago and we were walking over this whole exhibition, and this was when I freshly joined Zalando, and I was really amazed by like how many vendors and how many amazing talks we had. And already 1 year later, we're already on the main stage talking about a topic that is really important for us and also something that we think is very relevant not only for Zalando but also for e-commerce and mature e-commerce in general. We chose the title, which is a bit provocative. It's the trade-off stupid, because this kind of boils down all the things that we learned within the last year. And of course, we hope that after this talk, you also get why we chose this kind of title, right? But first of all, maybe a bit of an introduction. My name is Nils. I'm leading the experimentation platform team from the product side at Zalando. And before that, I was working at a lot of like smaller startups in growth roles most of the time. And we were usually already there improving metrics based on experiment-driven and evidence-driven methods, right? And one of these companies is called Contentful. And the fun fact is, I'm not the only one on this stage who worked at this company and this legendary growth team before. Right, Marcel?
Yes, thank you so much, Nils. Hi, everybody. My name is Marcel. I'm leading the experimentation platform from the engineering side. So Nils is my colleague. We worked together at Contentful already before. But I worked at a few companies before Contentful. Once a social network for students, maybe some of you know it still, StudiVZ, but then also a social network for researchers. And this is where I really learned the love for evidence-based decision-making with the help of experimentation. But right now we are at Zalando, and maybe as you know, if you look at the next slide, Zalando is a very complex company. It's also a very big company. We have 600 tech teams, roughly 15,000 employees, and thousands of engineers. Zalando is available in more than 25 markets across Europe, more than 6,000 brands on our platform, and more than 1 million products.
Yes, and it of course also doesn't stop there, right? When you look at our tech infrastructure and also in our business infrastructure, this is very complicated. We have more than 3,000 services that we maintain, 12 logistics centers, millions of requests coming in every single second. And it doesn't stop at tech, it's also the same for the business structure. We have so many products now, About You, Launch, Scale, TradeByte, Zeos. Those are all different products with different product teams that also focus on different aspects of the product, right? And with these different focuses, there come also different priorities. And with these different priorities, there also come different definitions of success. And this is where the story gets interesting. Because in our opinion, and what we learned so far, is that in mature e-commerce, you do not really have easy wins left. Most of the things that we've already done or that we've already tried out are already there, right? So what you rather have to decide on is which trade-off are you willing to make? And the interesting thing is what we usually talk about at conferences or what usually is very tangible are things like conversion rates, revenue, and speed. But what we noticed is something which is far more interesting and far less discussed, namely the metrics that quietly move, things like returns, margin, trust, right? And just this is what this talk is about, and we also want to make this very clear by showing you one specific example, right? There's this idea of a frictionless checkout, right? So in the usual setup, you basically see that you need to enter your address, you need to put in a couple of details before you check out, and you have a bit of friction in the mobile app and also like on the website, right? And in a frictionless checkout, you remove parts of this. And ultimately, this is of course something you can implement in every e-commerce store, and this is also something that we could implement at every page, essentially. So the question is then, what happens when you do this? Of course, the conversion rate might go up, right, in an ideal scenario, but maybe something else. Maybe there are also some other metrics that are affected by this, which is not that obvious. And this is ultimately something that we noticed all over the place, right? We have metrics that are very visible and tangible, like conversion rates, clicks, orders. This is something that you celebrate, that you talk about, and that you basically discuss all the time. But the interesting metrics are the ones that are less visible and take a lot of time also to actually surface. Like, for example, returns. We have a 30-day return window. Support tickets. It's not obvious that a support ticket is related to a change that you make on the website, right? And you have these dynamics all over the place, and once you see them all the time, right? So, for example, if you increase the urgency on your website, right, you lose trust of the customer. If you increase discounting, you lose profit margin. If you increase the frictionless checkout, then ultimately you will have problems with your operational excellence, right? And this doesn't stop only in this metric system that I just explained, but rather this goes into organizational structure. Because we always see the same thing. A new feature is created or thought about, and we can basically easily identify what the objective outcome is. So the local metrics that change and also the system metric that change. We have all of this. But as I said in the beginning, right, we have a lot of different teams and they focus on a lot of different things. So when you ask the team, is this a good change or not? Some teams will say yes and some teams will say no. And this is, of course, a problem, because if teams disagree, it gets escalated to the leadership. If it gets escalated to the leadership, they need to look at everything again, they need to discuss this again, exchange opinions, and ultimately it becomes a subjective decision, which you wanted to avoid in the first place, right? And also, I do not have to explain that this is like a very cumbersome way to make a decision, and also not a very speedy way to make a decision in such a huge organization, right? But the good news is, I think we have a solution for this, right?
Yes, very good cue, Nils. It's right. If we look at the next slide, we at Zalando use experimentation really as a decision system, or that helps us to make the right decisions. So very briefly, what do I mean when I talk about experimentation? So we are talking about randomized controlled trials, or some people also call it A/B test. Right? So very quickly, just how it works is we take all users, then we apply a randomization. So that means we randomly assign them to one or another group. In this example, 50-50 control and treatment. And then we observe exactly the change we roll out only to the treatment. The control has the previous behavior, the previous version of a feature. And then we observe. Right? We look at different data points. Could be sales data, could be event data, behavioral data. And then we bring everything together into an analysis, and then we look at the conclusions. Okay? I think, if we go to the next slide, I think what's pretty interesting, like if you look at the most successful companies, I have a few ones here on the left, in the last decade, they all share one trait. They don't guess, they test. Right? On the left side, you see companies that build these kind of platforms, this kind of technology for experimentation and A/B testing in-house. And Zalando is one of these companies as well. But we didn't build this kind of technology because we like building tools. Back then, 10 years ago, there just wasn't any option available on the market to buy it. That definitely has changed in the last few years. On the right-hand side, you have a few logos of platforms that are available to all. And I think what's really interesting is that the landscape has changed. The barrier to entry is much, much lower. You can think about it that like the hardware is solved, right? Really the question is now in the software, how do we use these tools best to make the good decisions? All right, if we look at the next slide and think about this hypothetical example of a frictionless checkout again. So we ran the A/B test and we get these results back. So in the control group, we maybe have a 5% conversion rate, and in the treatment group where we applied the change, we have a 5.6 conversion rate. So most teams maybe would pop a bottle of champagne right now and think, oh, fantastic, that's a 12% relative lift in conversion. That sounds really, really great. But there might be other things as well. So if we look at the return rate, for example, it went up a little bit as well. And with that, because of the things that come after that, we also see that the margin decreased. Now, here's the question. Which one is now the winner? It's not that easy, because it really depends on the product strategy. So for example, if a product strategy is to focus on a market share, then maybe reality B is the right thing to ship. But if a product strategy is about being cost conscious or look at profits, then not so much. And I think here is what's really important, that experimentation and measurement really gives companies the opportunity to make these decisions and really drive the strategy. If we look at the next slide. So basically the question is like, how do we solve this? And I think what's really, really important, this is also what we do at Zalando, is that we have this habit of reporting the cost of the win, right? And also very important, we report the cost of these wins in an automatic and systematic way. So we just don't rely on hope, it's a platform capability. So let's look maybe at like a few example metrics that I picked. So on the left side, you see the primary metrics. These are examples for primary metrics. These are metrics the team would basically optimize for, but they also measure as part of an experiment. You can think about this like there's the gas pedal, right? The thing usually should go up and to the right. And then we also have guardrail metrics. So these are more like metrics that the whole company cares about, right? And they are more like safety measures. Think about it more like as the brake, right? We want to make sure that when the primary metrics go up, that we still protect maybe the customer experience and the profit and all these other factors, right? And very important, the platform injects these metrics, these guardrail metrics, into all experiments that we do. So whatever we test, we always know what is the impact on these guardrail metrics. So that means if a product manager opens their report and sees a win on the metric that they care about, maybe it's conversion rate, they also see the cost of this win. There's the second thing. I think if you ever did A/B testing, you maybe know the situation. The A/B test is complete. You are sitting in this one meeting and you are discussing the results with your stakeholders. And then you see the results are mixed. Conversion is up, but returns are up as well. So everyone looks at the data, and then the kind of opinions start, right? Marketing maybe wants to ship the change. Logistics maybe not so much. So we waste potentially a lot of time, a lot of back and forth on how to really decide what do we do now. And here I think we have a solution for that. First of all, we create a scorecard where we have the primary metrics predefined for the experiment, obviously. We also define the guardrail metrics. In this example, it's a return rate and maybe support ticket. But here comes the kicker, what I think is really important. We define these decision rules. And we design these decision rules up front when we design the experiment, when we design the change. So basically, what do we do if the conversion rate goes up, but the returns go down? And we agree on the thresholds now, before we ship the change, right? Because in this moment, we are hopefully more cool-headed and more, let's say, rational and not so much emotional when the feature is already changed. We wonder if we should ship it or not. So, and we also, that's very important, we don't write these decision rules on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper and put into a pocket. We codify them in the experimentation platform, so in the systems that they are persisted alongside the change in the experiment. Cool, so maybe I would suggest that we look at a few more examples. Nils knows many examples.
Good idea. I brought a couple of examples, right? So first, there's another hypothetical example that we already addressed in the beginning, right? The frictionless checkout. And I kind of already anticipated it, right? Ultimately, obviously, if you remove friction from the checkout experience, you will have more people that complete the checkout, right? So you increase the conversion for sure. The problem is, however, there are some other metrics that might move. So if you remove the friction, there's maybe also the tendency that you buy more impulsively, or that, for example, you do not really check the address that you typed in. So maybe something like the delivery failures and the support tickets go up. And they are going up because we see these dynamics all the time. And when you notice dynamics like this, you need to strike a balance. You need to think about like how you really want to implement this in your product strategy. So you can think about like one of these concrete decision rules like this. We ship this change only if the checkout completion increases, obviously, but also the delivery failures need to stay below a certain threshold. And also the support tickets should not rise by more than a certain percentage, right? And this is how you basically make a piece of the UI which you could basically just go ahead and optimize the hell out of, a piece of your infrastructure and a piece of your ecosystem, and this makes the whole thing more strategically and aligns everyone on the actual goals that you have in your product strategy. The same thing for discounting, right? I already addressed this. We love to discount, and we love to use discounting for promoting things. We also use it to empty or like clear the inventory, obviously. And of course, it brings us more GMV, right? This is like the primary metrics that we can increase with this. But at the same time, if you discount stuff, of course, the contribution margin suffers, and also like the full share price. So people that buy the item for the full price become less. So also here, you need to strike a balance, because otherwise you're optimizing locally. So you can think of a decision rule like this. We ship it only if GMV increases, but the margin impact stays within a certain threshold, and the full price share also doesn't drop more than a certain percentage, right? And also here, you basically take a piece or like a method that you can use repeatedly and make this a strategic artifact that you can use in a very tactical way in order to move your product strategy forward. But I think, with AI, this becomes, I guess, easier, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Leider, unfortunately, not so much. I think AI is not only solving problems, it also creates problems that we need new solutions. So if we look at the next slide, I really try to find one chart that basically shows what I personally was observing also since, I would say, September, October last year, regarding the AI adoption, especially in the space of agentic coding and software development. So basically also product development. And if you look at this one chart, I'm not trying to convince you that this shift is actually happening. Let's just assume it is. But if you look at this chart, this is the number of GitHub commits, like basically source code contributions, which are labeled with one specific tool, which is Cloud Code, and it's right now at 4%. But the thing is, it has a 42,000x growth since 12 months, and this tool was developed by one guy at Anthropic as a side project, and now completely exploded. The other thing is, usually, at least right now, software developers are not happily saying, hey, I built this with AI. So also, I'm pretty sure that's vastly underreported, right? But I think we are definitely approaching a world where the cost of writing code is approaching zero, and it gets much, much cheaper. So really the question is like, what does it mean then for what we talked about before? And if we look at the next slide, I think one thing is, pretty safe to say that we will see more changes shipped per week, which is also very good. But that also means that potentially, if the company has enough traffic, that more variants are live at the same time. And that also can lead to more harmful local optimizations. So the problem that I see a little bit here is that we definitely see this curve, how the velocity grows, but the curve, how the confidence grows, that we are doing the right thing with AI, is not growing with the same kind of speed. And this is, in my opinion, a problem that needs to be tackled by companies like ours and maybe yours. If we look at the next slide, if we look back to the kind of first picture, or one of the first slides that we showed, the trigger is the same. So we have a new feature, but then the objective outcome is a little bit different if you use these 1, 2, 3 habits that I discussed, or that we discussed. We now have a shared evidence, pre-aggregated decision rules. So what happens? We can make decisions faster with fewer escalations. This leads also to safer rollouts, because these guardrails protect customers, profit, and many, many other guardrail metrics. Maybe also the functionality of the feature itself. And it also allows us to do repeatable learning across the company. But here's the thing. The chart, that thing that goes up and to the right, it's not just about coding volume. I think it's really a signal that we are transitioning into a world from where humans make decisions with data towards a world where AI agents, or AI in general, makes decisions partially supported by guardrail rules and how we basically set the boundaries for this AI. So AI is a very, very powerful accelerator. I'm all in on this, but at least now it doesn't have any strategic intuition built in. So it doesn't know that, for example, for your company right now, profit matters more than revenue, right? Unless you explicitly tell the AI that this is what we are aiming for, right? If you would give an AI an unconstrained goal to maximize sales, I don't know what would happen. Most probably would burn through the margin and report happily a huge success, but it would also potentially destroy the brand perception doing that. So this is why these kind of guardrails and codifying these decisions is so important and so critical, because if we would start doing this right now, we are all building ahead for the future where we give more and more control to the AI agents, but in a safe and reliable way, so we can all sleep good at night.
Yes, and just to sum all of this up and make a quick wrap up, right? We think that classic management advice still holds, right? Strategy means that you show and that you surface what you're willing to sacrifice and the trade-offs that you're willing to make. But we think in the nowadays world, there are a couple of prerequisites, right? You need an experimentation platform to understand the dynamics of your company. This is the only way you can do this. There is no other option than to surface this via experimentation, as Marcel explained, right? Once you have these dynamics in place and you understood them a bit, you need to front load the discussions, right? You do not want to have inefficient decision making like we described in our example. You need to implement this in the company goals, and you also need to define safety rules in order to make sure that local optimization is not abused, basically. And lastly, of course, you need to switch your view a bit from experimentation as a pure optimization tool, but rather as a tool that can really surface the company dynamics that are in place, especially in mature e-commerce, in order to really make sure that you define the strategy, the product strategy in the right way, and that you also validate the product strategy in the right way.
Yeah, very good, Nils. So maybe in one closing, if this topic sounds interesting to you, I have a shameless plug to make here. We're also organizing a Berlin experimentation meetup. The next one is in March 12th. So come around, scan the QR code if you like, or just Google for experimentation meetup. If this is interesting to you, we have a community of roughly 1,000 people in Berlin alone. So I think with that in mind, we are closing. Thank you so much, everybody. It was really a pleasure and honor to be here, and I hope this was interesting to you.
Thanks a lot.
Well, guys, thank you so much. Very interesting. My question to you, because you run the experimentation program for a huge brand, of course. We run experimentation programs for smaller e-commerce brands. So what I was thinking is, what is your thought on running experimentation programs for smaller web shops? And then I'm talking about around 100, 200, 300,000 visitors.
I mean, there are many things that we can say about this, right? Also looking towards the future in particular, right? So first of all, of course, you probably have to deal with smaller sample sizes. So experiments take longer. Or you, for example, have to think about like a larger impact or larger change that you imply, right? So those are all sort of the basic things. But I think sort of like the change, if we look into the future a bit, I think the options that we have to basically simulate user behavior in the future with like synthetic user, digital twins and things like this, we think the magnitude or like how many users you actually have in place will not even play such a big role anymore in the upcoming future, right? And then we think the same thing that we just talked about today apply, right? You need decision rules. You need to understand the dynamics between these different metrics that you're trying to improve. And so this is basically, I would say, mostly good news for also smaller companies, because often you think, okay, these big, companies, they can do experimentation to that scale, but we lack the traffic, and that, I guess, is not an excuse anymore than in the future.
Exactly. Thanks so much.
All right, we have another question right here in the front row.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you. My question is, you have shown about this cloud code commit, right? The cloud commit.
Yeah.
So we see this, AI expediting the entire ship-out process. So can't we use AI to also do the experimentation and make the better trade-off decision, so that, you know, whatever time we are taking as a human being to just write the code and then taking whole, you know, decision making, everything will be much faster?
Yeah. I think it's a very good question. We definitely will see, I think, an increase in the number of changes that we deploy. But as we mentioned in the talk, I think it's really important to tell the AI what is the company strategy. Are we optimizing for profit, for user engagement, or for other metrics? And this is where I think we need to have this kind of decision-making system that the AI can then use what to optimize for. Because otherwise, how should it know, right? But generally, yes, also as Nils mentioned, I think the whole landscape, how we do testing and how do we create the kind of causal inference of the changes that we see would definitely change. Yeah.
And also maybe to add on top of this, right, I think also like what the companies and sort of like the humans at the companies, right, they still need to focus on sort of like predicting the future, right? We kind of need to take all the crazy data that is floating around and say, what do we think will happen in 5 years? And then make a product strategy out of this. What we describe today is basically just, in our opinion, accurate execution of like the strategy then, right?
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, my name is Nikhil Bajpai from Arama. Thank you, Nils. Thank you, Marcel, for your presentation. A question about this is that experimentation is used, okay, in a company, but decision making still happens based on intuition, at least in smaller companies.
Yes.
And to go from that intuition to experimentation needs a tad bit of a cultural change in the company. Can you speak to that effect a little bit of how did you tackle this change in culture and thinking, you know, to trust the system?
Yeah. I mean, we're in a lucky situation, of course, at Zalando, because I think this culture is already there, right? So we are working in a very scientific and experiment-driven way. And this is also something that we kind of promote and evangelize within the company. We have experimentation days. We have a lot of like artifacts that promote experimentation, and also center of excellences that basically focus on these sort of things. But of course, what I always say, you know, like if you're not in this situation that you do not have like a very mature organization, you need to, there is no general advice to do this, right? It really depends on the company, and it really depends, like, for example, if the leadership is already convinced and you rather need to convince the teams, or the other way around. And based on this, you really need to treat this sort of cultural problem also a bit like a product, strategy, or like a product itself, right? And find out what works, what convinces people, what is still the hurdle, and all these basic questions, right? So you can use basically product management method also to promote the culture ultimately.